Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Grow Your Path to Wellness. We host a new episode every week and typically post on Sundays. So be sure to like and follow to be sure to see the next episode and the latest episodes. Last week, we had the opportunity to last week we actually had to reschedule. We had a scheduling conflict, miscommunication, but so we didn't host any last week. The last episode you'll see is from Miranda Campbell talking about boundaries and intimate partner relationships. So make sure you go back and listen to that one. This week, I am hosting solo. As many of you have heard, if you're familiar with our podcast, Kelsey lives in the beautiful Southern Ohio area with all sorts of nature and trees, but doesn't always have access to Wi-Fi when there's a winter storm. So she will be hopefully back with us next week to co-host. This week, we welcome Dr. Sousan. She is going to be talking to us about being a carrier of the trauma virus. And I put in quotes, the trauma virus, not the whole title. Are you a carrier of the trauma virus? So we're very excited to welcome here on our podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, man. Such a pleasure to be here. And sorry to miss Kelsey, actually. So, and all of you fellow Ohioans who are stuck in this, I'm on the East Coast, so we have our own storms, but nothing like what I hear in Ohio. I look forward to going there someday in the snow and really getting to know your country, part of the country.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me. I wanted to mention that I kind of came to trauma sideways in a way, because my original field is actually I do international development work, which is economic development, poverty alleviation, and that sort of thing. And so I came to the topic because I had little kids, when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, and decided to work closer to home. I didn't want to be traveling so much to write my Ph.D. thesis, and I looked at Native American tribes. Native American communities in the U.S. and Canada, and was looking at why certain communities were on the reservations and reserves were stuck in cycles of poverty and in some cases violence and addictions and that sort of thing. And as I looked at those issues, I got really interested and really realized they told me in their own words that they were being affected by historical traumas that were continuing to reverberate in their communities. And so I wrote a whole doctoral dissertation for economists on the importance of looking at trauma and the impact it had on poverty and the basically intergenerational poverty and violence, and how we couldn't just go in. We needed to go in and pour money into building schools and buildings and roads and all the good stuff, building infrastructure, but also we need to support people to heal, and that was an essential piece, that they both needed to go together. So there's actually a Harvard Magazine article. If you Google my name, it's Sousan Abadian, and Harvard Magazine, you'll get this article that describes some of that work that I did early on. That might be interesting to some of your folks. And I think it was in 2008 that it came out. It's been a while. Okay. I've been in this business a while. So that's how I started to come to the whole trauma field. And then this was in the 1990s. And so even though I was trained in economics and government and anthropology, my original master's degree was in anthropology, cultural anthropology, I have become known for my work in collective trauma and the healing of collective trauma. So that's also trauma that happens to large groups of people over periods of time, and the damage to cultures, actually, that takes place as well. Wow. So that's how I came to this topic.
What a beautiful profession. I'm a clinical social worker. So, our routes that we can go to in our master's program are like micro and macro. And as you're talking, I'm like, that's like big scale macro. That's the big change that we try to instill and work on. So I am so appreciative that you described that, because I didn't realize there was people like you out there doing that kind of work to make the big systemic change that we need. So much appreciated.
Well, you're so sweet. And it's so, once you see the effects of trauma, like you can't unsee it again, right? This is the thing. And I became this kind of, I don't know what to call myself. I was just so passionate about it, and then realized I was hitting the wall, because people weren't interested really. I mean, I saw it everywhere. I saw the damage, I saw what was going on, and people were not interested. In fact, it's taken the pandemic, it's taken decades. It's really horrible to say, but I mean, I try to bring it to the attention of various peoples. Anyway, I won't bore you with the details, but the pandemic seemed to wake people up to the trauma again and the effects of trauma. And of course, the macro cannot be solved without looking at the micro, obviously, right? Collective trauma and the healing of collective trauma, it requires working on the micro level, human beings. So, it's all, you can't heal the collective unless you heal individual trauma. But the thing about the collective is it's also damage to the culture. So it's at the level of, I'm very interested right now in how trauma is replicated in our narratives. And narratives that are in our religions, narratives that are in how we tell our histories, narratives, and it replicates trauma. And I've written a little bit about that. So I'm very fascinated by toxic post-traumatic narratives, is what I call it. And anyway, so there's a lot.
Like addicted to your own story.
Absolutely, that's part of it. Yeah, you know this. I can.
And then it's also in our DNA. Our DNA too.
We've become really enamored by this whole thing of the the damage, and it is true. But I also believe we can change our DNA. Like if our DNA changed once through trauma, we can change it back and change it better. So I don't want us to get even enamored by, oh my God, we've got physiological changes. It's like, okay, we can change it back. We've changed it once, we can change it again. So I think looking at your website, that you teach about the power that we are, that trauma affects us, obviously in horrible ways. Sometimes we have bad habits. I mean, some of this is habitual, right? We were raised in families that had, so there's certain ways of behaving that we've got to unlearn, ways of thinking we have to unlearn, but also our stories. As you said, the addiction to our own stories that we've got to, give up, and our attachment to. It's really our identity, like give up our attachment to certain victim ideologies that we have. I mean, I've had to do work on, I'm speaking from my own experience with myself. I mean, I am, once I started working in trauma, fortunately, I got to see how much of history, my own history was, it's never an accident, right? You go into this business and you come on this trauma stuff in part, you think you're working on it outside yourself, and then you realize, wait a second, this is in my own families, in myself, in my history. And so a lot of it became my own. And also I was married to someone who was Jewish, and his history, his Holocaust history, and I had young kids, and this determination, I was not going to let it go one more generation, to the best of my abilities. Of course, each generation has its own burden to carry, but.
I just had a baby recently. He's 5 months old. It's our first.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
That's
and
so
I was
exciting.
very intent on breaking generational bonds and all sorts of change things, right? And it's just like when I do therapy, right? I can preach it all day. Doing it in real life, practice individually on my own is rough. It is tough work for anyone to break those bonds. Yeah.
But you're doing it, sweet. Don't be, I hope you're not being hard on yourself. I mean, the fact that you're even thinking about it is amazing, right?
Absolutely. As hard as a new mom can be on themselves, right?
So listen, if I may, forgive me if I may, because I wish someone had just sat me down when I was a mother, really young, a mother of young kids, and just told me to enjoy it more, instead of because I tried so hard to undo what I thought was done to me, and make sure things didn't go down, and blah blah blah. And my kids are amazing. I mean, I have amazing young people as kids, and I'm proud of them, and they've turned out beautifully. But I would want for you what I would have wanted for myself, which is just to enjoy it more and to know it's going to work out. You're already great. The kids are going to be fine. You're thinking about it. And they're so resilient. And what you don't figure now, you'll figure out 5 years from now, 10 years. There's always time. So, just enjoy the miracle.
I think it took me 4 months to really get, and there was other factors involved in that, right? Like postpartum and hormones and all sorts of
Yes.
things, right?
Oh my gosh.
But it took me probably 4 months to realize. People started to say to me, and I really started to believe it, the days are long, the years are short. And I would just see him hitting all these developmental milestones and all this stuff flying. And I was like, I got to cuddle him a little bit longer. I'm going to hold him for a few more laps. I'm going to, right? Like, just get out of your head in the moment, right? Yeah, absolutely.
They're so adorable. What an age. I mean, that first year is such a miracle, the changes. I know you're sleepless and all that stuff, but it's, you know.
Yeah, curiosity is probably the most beautiful thing, right? Watching them explore and understand the world is really cool.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So tell me about, so in our title, it's, are you transmitting the trauma, or are you a carrier of the trauma virus? Explain this to me. How do you, did you coin this term? What is this?
Yes, you know, and I coined it with the people who publicizing the work I'm doing. I mean, on one level, it makes me nervous to say such a thing, but you know, it's sort of the pandemic was happening, and it's a wonderful way to catch attention, and it is viral in a way. I mean, basically, how we treat other people, you know, in our family systems. If your parents have had trauma, it's not necessarily the case, but it's likely if they've had, especially if they have childhood trauma that's been extensive, it could be that they're carrying behavior patterns, is how I like to say, and ways of thinking that are trauma-based. There's a wonderful, very simple book on codependency that's kind of a classic by Pia Mellody on codependency, and I'm trying to remember what the exact title is. I don't have it off my, but if you look up Pia Mellody on codependency, and there are like 5 areas that she describes on behavior patterns that are, you know, examples of how we're distorted. Life can become distorted. Ways of thinking, ways of behaving can become distorted through trauma, childhood trauma. And I think those are, you know, we carry those because we then think those are, we normalize them like that's the way it is. And then we treat our kids that way again. So that's how we transmit some of these behavior patterns and ways of thinking through the generations. I mean, that's a very simplified way of saying it, but that's really, it's that simple, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
It's socialization. So, I mean, you know this better than I, but the first years of a child's life are critical. They're almost like they're in a hypnotic state. They're picking up not only what we say, but how we behave. And they think this is normal. Whatever we do, if we beat them, they think they deserved it. You know, they don't say mom's off the rocker or she's, you know, she's drunk or whatever. They think they deserved it. And then they grow up thinking they don't deserve love. They deserve to be hit. I mean, all those basic things, those that's a virus. That's a virus of a way of thinking and a way of behaving. And so then they go treat other people. Then, you know, so it gets transmitted. So in that way, it's kind of, it is viral.
Yeah, that developmental and Kelsey was going to be so, when she listens, she's going to be so sad she's missing out on this because she specializes in, wonderful. She specializes in developmental and attachment trauma. We all work with those things, but, and then the other thing that, so the couple things came to mind is how many clients I talk to could be the worst of the worst of the worst, and I don't want to compare traumas, but the most severe traumas to, you know, one situational trauma. And they don't believe that it's a trauma until they get outside of that environment, right? So like you said, until I'm old enough and allowed to go to a friend's house down the street and I realize that they don't have to do this a certain way, or their mom doesn't scream at them every time they do something this wrong, or they have food in the cabinet, like all these things, you don't know what you don't know until you leave that environment and see it.
Exactly.
Your mom is your mom. Your mom is your mom. Your dad is your dad. Regardless,
and
right?
You love them, and you're loyal, right? I mean, you've been, you know, so there's a program, again, Pia Mellody used to be running it. I don't know, they're not doing this anymore, but it was called Survivors. And you went for a week basically to this program, and they gave you a couple sheets of paper in the beginning, and you're supposed to list the kinds of traumas you went through from 0 to 8 years. Basically, you survived childhood is what they want to say, 0 to 18. You're supposed to list what happened to you, when, you know, what age you were, what kind of trauma it was, and who did it, and all this stuff, and how you feel about it. People go to this thing, they get a couple pages, and they go, I don't have anything. I mean, how am I going to fill a couple pages? And invariably, I mean, the first day or two of this program, people are told their various kinds of traumas are described to them, like what's emotional abuse, what's physical abuse, what's sexual. And it's like all of a sudden you can see their faces change. Like they be like, oh my God, you mean this isn't normal? And the effects the trauma has on people. And they go, oh my God, I am like that. This is why I feel the way I do. And this is why I have these addictions. And this is, like, and then they come back, they want more pages. They're sort of like, so you give them a couple pages at first, and then
Build
like
the
20 pages later, like, and you don't want people to be stuck in this stuff, but the only way to break the virus, like the pattern, is to become aware, right? And so it's just,
people ask all the time, what is your approach to therapy? What approaches do you use? What theoretical background do you come up from? And one of the biggest things is psychoeducation. It so simple, but even with, like, if you compare this to COVID and coronavirus, so many wild things happen because misinformation.
It is
right?
Exactly right.
If you have the information, then you have the power to do something with it. And it's so, like you said, it's like a light bulb. It's like an aha. It's a validation, a normalization. Yes. The other thing that came to mind when you were talking was the meaning you derive from the trauma, which I'm a big lover of Gabor Mate.
Yes.
I just want to meet him in person one day, maybe. But that's, like, as you were talking, I was like imagining one of his trainings or speeches or whatever it was on how, okay, so now my mom hit me and now I've developed a sense of lack of self-worth from that. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I don't deserve something. Yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff. Exactly. What is the meaning? Viktor Frankl was a really amazing guy who talked about that trauma is trauma because of the meaning that we it's not a particular event that happened, but it's the meaning that we give the event, right? To some extent anyway. But yes, it is very, and children young children have a kind of a typical way in which they interpret things. As I said, like really young children don't blame their parents. They almost always say there must be something wrong with them if their caregiver abused them. So it's so natural that we would pick up this idea that we're not worthy, so you've got the education that has to take place, right, to break the cycle. And then you've got the mourning that has to take place, the grief, the anger, all those emotions that, in the shamanic world, I've sort of integrated various different practices over time. There's something called soul retrieval, and it's parts of us, this idea that parts of us, when we've been traumatized, break off. And, it's obvious because we have multiple personality disorders. But in the shamanic world, there are actually parts of us that are soul that take off because they can't handle the pain, right? And part of what happens when you go through these memories and remember what happened to you and really own the pain and the suffering is those parts start to come back. You welcome those parts back to integrate, but they have emotions, right? Mm-hmm. They have anger, they have sadness, they have fear, and you've got to process all that stuff. Now, you don't have to take your whole life to process it. You want to have a discrete amount of time and who knows what that'll be, but hopefully it won't be forever. But you process and you sit with those young parts of yourselves and you welcome them back in and you love them and you give them what they never got. And that's where, therapeutic help is where it's really about holding, helping the person give to themselves what they weren't given that they need, right? Teaching them how to parent themselves. So they integrate these parts back. And then over time, now here's the tricky part of trauma, right? Part of the tricky part of trauma is we can get almost transfixed by it. It can become, it's so strong, it could become one's identity. So at some point, one has to choose, and remember, I am not my traumas. Mm-hmm. I am not the child that was abused. I'm not the victim of sexual assault. That's not all of who I am. It's not, in fact, it made me wise. It's made me wise. It's now I'm integrated back in. But I choose to be, who do I want to be? And then it's self-creation, which is a responsibility.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the grieving process because we've mentioned it in it's just naturally come up in a few episodes, and it's in everything. No matter what decision you make, there's going to be, or no matter what happens to you or changes are made, there's going to be some sort of loss, grieving that you have to go through, right? And that's so crucial. I love that you brought up the soul retrieval, And it just connected in my brain to so many, like I do inner child work, but then there's also internal family systems with parts work and just so many different things. It's all about reintegrating.
And they're all wonderful.
That. Yeah.
They're all wonderful. I do all they're all really valuable and called different things. And it's great. But all these pieces that we've cut off, yeah.
And like you said, it becomes, and I know we mentioned before about the biological impact, but just one of the major things I do is educate people on the stress response in the survival part of your brain, right?
Absolutely.
Like that's somewhere else that is really true. And it's not something that you hold on to hold on to the story, but to understand what's happening is that, yeah, you're in a survival response. That makes sense. Like if you didn't do if you didn't compartmentalize, if you didn't dissociate, if you didn't learn to be reactive, your brain said, we're going to die, right? And so that's what it continues to hold on to and says, no, I can't go back to that memory or I'll die. I have to stick to this story or I won't make it, right? Like, and your brain is stuck in this.
Yes.
This is the only way I can survive, but that's not reality. It's just the primal part of your brain telling you that.
Exactly. Are they lucky to have you? Amanda, it's exactly.
Yeah. But it doesn't have to be that way. It changes, like you said, it changes, it alters our physiology, but it doesn't have to remain that way.
Yes, I didn't realize you were talking about it in that way, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I work on myself physiologically all the time, in terms of calming myself down, the whole polyvagal thing, just the various exercises to feel the safety in my own body. Mm-hmm. Even if, the outside world may feel unsafe, things may feel unsafe, the learning is to remember, have a felt sense of safety within one's own system. So whatever else is happening doesn't seem so dangerous. I think it's really, and this is all physiological. It's the stress hormones. Anyway, do you need to get that?
Nope, I'm good. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so
you're right.
You mentioned
weaving is no, and it's so important. I mean, we judge ourselves often with having to cry and the tearfulness and the vulnerabilities and the way I see it, we're not only grieving, we're the first generation really that's able to do this. So we're not only grieving for ourselves, we're grieving for every generation that has come before us that wasn't able to feel this out. Mm-hmm. So let's give ourselves a break. We might be,
heavy.
Don't you think? We should give ourselves a break and allow ourselves to, be okay. It doesn't mean we live our life in grief, but if we have to have a good cry for 15 minutes every morning for 3 years, that's okay. You'll feel a lot better the rest of the day.
It literally releases stress from your body. Like there's a certain type of tear that's specifically to release the stress from your body. It's natural, again, biological. Exactly. But for some reason we have this social implication of it makes you weak or whatever the story is. We tell ourselves that we just keep shaking up the pop bottle and wonder why we feel like we're going to explode, or we do explode.
Shake up the pop bottle. That's right. I mean, we could think of it as a form of sauna, 15-minute sauna every morning. We're just, releasing this stuff in terms of tears out of our system. It's exactly right. And not to judge ourselves. We're carrying a lot. And oftentimes, this isn't healthy. And I'm not suggesting this, but many of us do this because many of us are empathic. The people who probably come to you, I can tell you are that way. I'm that way. We pick up stuff from the people around us who are not willing to look at those things too. And, so some of that's releasing for the system that I hate to say that again, I don't want us to be doing this, but we are doing this in a way. So it's okay. We're not weak. Actually, we're incredibly strong, and it's not a disorder. So grieving is natural. It's important. We used to do it in community where people grieved together, made song, dance, swayed, movement, and, it was just like, vocalizing it. There's lots of ways traditionally people grieve together.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's an important task. Some of us have to do it.
We all have to do it. I mean, living in a pandemic for 3 years, if you're not grieving, I don't know where you're living. And it's isolated us. It's forced us. Mental health, mental illness, addiction, depression, anxiety, grief, any of these things that become difficult and challenging for us thrive in isolation. Well, I mean, there's a couple that, maybe thrive more in a social environment, but thrive in isolation, right? So if it wasn't already rough enough, it's it's really impacted in the pandemic. Something I wanted to make sure I touched on, I know you mentioned a few different, cultural implications there, but what else? What else do we need to know? It's Black History Month, so I feel like it's appropriate, talk about that, intergenerational collective trauma. But then any other wisdom you have on the cultural impact of trauma? I know you talked about the reservations, and then any gender, sexuality, anything like that you've done in your research or that you're aware of that we should all know about?
Well, there's so much to say. What did you say before all this, though, that really, anyway, my mind's going in 10,000 different directions at once. Well, I've written something, a book that I'm hoping to get published on a topic that is not relevant to the United States too much. It is here, but it's just as an example, is female genital mutilation.
I read, not to interrupt you, but in my...
Please interrupt me.
I read in my women's studies, I believe, in undergrad, we read Half the Sky.
Half the Sky. What a great book. Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Oh my God.
Yes. They actually came and spoke at college and signed our books. Fantastic. And everything. Yeah. It was wonderful. So yes,
fabulous.
I am sadly more familiar with female genital mutilation than I would like to, because that was a very descriptive, necessary book.
Yeah. Well, I'm writing a book from the perspective of trauma, in the sense of it being a culturally sanctioned act of trauma, in a way. Not all of the practices, but by and large, as a general way of looking at it. And then really interested in how trauma practices get embedded in culture. And that's an extreme way. I mean, it might be obvious to you and me, but to people who are practicing it, they don't see it that way, right? So what are we doing that to other cultures they may look at us and go, oh my God, look at what they're doing, right? So what are things we're doing? Again, it's like the family systems. We're in our families and we don't see anything else. We think our families are normal and perfect and nothing's wrong. And we've had ideal childhoods, except, we're not too happy, and we're but so within our own cultures, we also have things that are female genital mutilation like, but what are they?
Circumcision.
Well, yeah.
I mean, just things that I've learned in my own pregnancy and childbirth experience. Just the questions I would ask, and I would say, why? And they're like, well, that's just how we do it, or that's just protocol, or that. Yeah. Does it have to be? So really, like, going into your own power and saying, does that align with my values and my gut, and does that make sense for my family? But then the other side of it is, if you are a healthcare provider, if you are engaging with people on a daily basis, providing any sort of service, I'd say, are you taking into account their culture and their history? And maybe whatever you're doing needs to be tweaked a little bit, because it can be traumatic.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tricky question, right? Because there are anthropologists who have supported female genital mutilation because it's their culture. They would say it's their culture. Mm-hmm. So so my book just talks about all of that, like cultural relativism, and what does it mean, and when is it useful, when is it not useful, when is, like everything. And also, this question of choice, that's about gender in a sense. I coined this term called adaptive consent, that a lot of times we consent to things because we want to be part of a community, or we want to be accepted, or we want to be, whatever, all these, it's an form of adaptation, sort of what you were saying, that none of these things that we develop from childhood are necessarily, it's not a disorder. It's our best way of adapting to very difficult circumstances, obviously. So anyway, adaptive consent means it looks like we're consenting to things, but we're really consenting out of limitation. We don't even see there's an outside to the box that we're stuck in. So, and so we've got to consider all that in any case, with clients and stuff. I mean, so in our own culture, I mean, anything that makes us feel less than, or someone is above us, this illusion that anyone is above and below is a lie. I mean, it's a toxic story, and trauma does that. Trauma and intergenerational trauma and Black History Month, any system that makes one human being above another is a lie. That's so simple.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just that simple.
Yeah, there's no the power dynamics. There is no. I always found this most interesting. Even still, just engaging with like medical doctors and like surgeons. There's like a certain working in that system. There was like a certain level that you could get to, and then you just didn't have access to that person anymore because they just didn't see you.
Yeah,
you just didn't. And I won't say everyone. There are doctors and people out there that are much more personable and understanding and trauma informed, but it was like there was a culture of I made it. Like I'm a doctor, so like I can't engage with the nurse or the medical assistant or the scheduler. And obviously, even just in being a clinical social worker, providing therapy, there's almost a white coat syndrome, even though I show up looking very personable, right? But people have this conception in their mind based on what they see on TV or their engagements in the healthcare system in general, and they think that there's going to be a power differential. Or don't even get me started on our prison system. And
for sure. Oh my gosh. Well, it's interesting. There's in the professions, people are, I don't know how to say this exactly, but there's a lot of trauma in how people are trained. And so these doctors and surgeons or whoever you're talking about, they're just to be trained to do what they're doing is not an easy task, obviously, but it's so there's a dehumanization that occurs. I mean, I was close up with someone who was a psychiatrist, and I got to know a little bit about how he was trained, and it was brutal. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this, how could he possibly have empathy or compassion given how he was trained? To actually almost worked it out of him, is how it seemed to me. And I studied at Harvard. I have 3 graduate degrees from Harvard. People, I don't try to say that up front because people get intimidated or they project all sorts of stuff in me. But it was not easy. I mean, I had to really work hard to hold my humanity sometimes. It was, people are very cerebral. Anyway, and they're beautiful people everywhere, and they're, but it's almost like a dysfunctional family, a lot of these institutions. People are not in touch with their emotions, their heart. So I understand that they're dissociated, they're almost like, and so from that dissociated place, they can't relate to someone who's dealing with emotions. It's really, we're threatening. I mean, I remember trying to do my doctoral work, and one or two of my advisors were almost like threatened by my work because I was talking about trauma. And I remember one of my advisors took me aside and said, some of the stuff you're writing about, I was writing about alcoholism. I said, that sounds like my uncle. I mean, it came close to home, right? And
I'm sorry, you wanted to keep that. You wanted to keep that over there, and I brought it back to you. I'm so sorry. That was my goal.
Well, we have worked so hard to be successful and professional, and to get our Ph.D. or to become a doctor, and then to or to be a professor in that case at Harvard. I mean, and then to have this vulnerability show up in ourselves or have it shown to us is scary. Like, oh my God, am I really that competent? Do I really know what I'm doing? Oh my God, I'm feeling, like it's not easy. So I have a lot more appreciation and understanding for it now than I did then. I was pissed off then because it was like, there was a lot of resistance to bringing this material out. In the end, I was highly successful. I was honored. It was really, I had a wonderful, my senior advisor was Amartya Sen. He won the Nobel Prize in economics, and he backed me 1,000%. And that was very helpful. And he is incredible. He's an incredible man. But, it's not easy. This material's not easy. And we have to have compassion for those who have a rough time around it. It's confrontative, right?
Yeah, that's so true. I appreciate that perspective shift because, you're so right. But they're not trained to be empathetic or compassionate. Most schools and medical schools and things like that aren't training, empathy and compassion. Though most people probably go into those because that's their intent, right? That's their heart, that's their drive.
But it's brutal, right? I mean, they get to see all this death and suffering, and I mean, how can they possibly, a lot of them are empathetic, but I'm just saying it's hard, and
without that support along the way. It's all
are they being
very
supported?
academic. Yeah.
They're not being supported. I mean, it's just, I don't know what support they're getting,
Yeah.
so anyway, just for us to have compassion, we're all doing the best we can
with what we have.
Trying with what we have, trying, and I mean, all of us. I'm sure those people are, doing the best to serve the people. I mean, it's not easy being here on planet Earth, and we're just finally waking up to some of this stuff, and so we got to hold each other compassionately through this process. Is how I see it now.
Yes, thank you. Not to like beat them over the head. Just an example. It's like something I've seen as a consistent theme that's more of a systemic issue too, because we need to do better in those programs and those
absolutely
and those education systems to be more trauma informed. And it's always so interesting to me every time I do like a continuing education training on like the stress response in the body or how trauma is stored in your body, or like the research is there and it's been there. Yeah. Before our modern medical system. It's been there. They've known about the stress disease connection. And I have all my theories as to why it's not incorporated more. But it's just that I think that's the most frustrating part. Is like just like any other research that they're basing the practice off of, that is there, but for some reason we just take that out and don't include it. We don't teach about it. We don't understand the value of or necessity of it.
Well, and then they've got to face the fact that, my God, they're the way they're training their physicians or whatever, is incredibly stressful.
Yeah.
They're and traumatic sometimes. I mean, it's hard. Yeah. So if they teach about stress, I mean, it would be, I mean, they are introducing mindfulness practices and things like that. So there are doctors that are doing amazing work in that field and are introduced. So it's happening, but it's not happening fast enough for us. But yeah, evolution takes time, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we had a few things we didn't touch on, but we're running short on time here. So is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to make sure you shared today? And then we always ask like last minute words of wisdom, mantras, or even just a free resource that you want to give our audience today.
Oh my gosh, I wish I'd been better prepared for mantras or resources. I have an inner child PDF that I can offer that's free. That I think it's on my website, so that's available.
Okay, great. If you just get it to me, I can link it in the show notes for them.
Beautiful. I can do that. Absolutely. And last thoughts. I just, my whole passion right now is to support people to know themselves not as victims, but as creator beings. So that is what, I want to support people not to get stuck in the victim piece. And believe me, there's some days I got to work on myself to move myself out of victim. So it's not like it ever ends necessarily, but to really remember who we are, who we really are. And that's and we're creators, we're creator beings, and we're here to create beautiful lives. I mean, this is our to bring heaven to earth. I mean, really, that's how I see it. And it's all it starts with the internal state. So that's what I know you're working on. That's what I'm working on with people. And healing trauma is a step in that direction, but it's not the be all end all of everything.
Yeah, we're not. I think we get so dissociated isn't the right word. We just get so disconnected, and we always live like. Sorry, I'm a very visual person, so to me this makes sense.
Okay.
But we're always living out here. For those of you just listening, I'm just kind of waving my hand out in front of me. We're always living here, and it's like this disconnect from who we truly are. We're like floating away from ourselves and living this.
And our dreams, our dreams and passions. I mean, really, like, what brings you alive? Mm-hmm. And that's, and the problem with trauma is sometimes it interferes with that. So that's why we got to address it. But really, what makes you come alive? And that's the question. And and the responsibility.
People struggle with that too, right? Yes. We've been disconnected from ourselves. We've been told who we are by others for so long, and ourselves after we've developed meaning from those things that happened to us, that we don't know who we are. And I think that's some of the most challenging work for myself personally, for my clients. Like, you've been functioning a certain way for so long, to really stop and step in and say, what do I want? What do I need? Who am I? What do I value?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
But the
that's what I
beautiful
work on
thing,
people with.
you get to figure that
I do
out,
dream
right?
building. Well,
Oh.
yes. And then so I start with what's your dream, what's your passion, and then what's in the way of that. So that's what I like to do now.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much for being here. And yes, please come back. Do you have an anticipated date on your book? Because maybe we could bring you back then.
Absolutely. I also want to mention, I forgot to mention,
Yeah.
that might be of interest to you and other people, is that I've been asked to teach something, a course beginning in May for about 7 modules to an organization called Confer in London. And it's called An Introduction to the Sacred. And it's actually for therapists and psychoanalysts, but it's for anyone in the healing or anyone who's interested. It's really about finding nourishment beyond the psychological framework. So if anyone might be interested, I could also give that link to you once it comes out, and you could post that. So that's another whole world that I also delve in.
I would love that.
And I'm working with a shaman therapist who's also a druid, who's practices shamanic practices from Scotland. So he's in Scotland, I'm here, and we're going to do this course for psychotherapists and anyone who's interested in healing.
That is amazing. I always love hearing of new resources and courses like that, you know, where it's so it integrates all the different aspects of who we are with the spirituality component, because I think people forget there's actually research to show how crucial some connection to spirituality is to healing. There's a lot of research in addiction recovery specifically, but if you don't have that, it could be the tree outside. If you don't have some connection to a higher power, the universe, whatever that is for you, to be able to get, the way I explain it to my clients, because a lot of times they get stuck in a religion mindset, like they have to pick a religion, or otherwise they just say they're not interested, or they don't have a spirituality or anything like that. I say, when you're having your toughest times, your darkest moments, your most highest crises or highest anxiety, what is something you could say to yourself, or to give you perspective in the universe, perspective in the world you're living in, about, you know, this one thing is happening and yet all of this is around me still. What guides you, what gives you perspective.
Yes, absolutely. And what I was approached for this in part because they realized that their therapists and psychoanalysts who are working with other people, the caregivers, weren't finding enough nourishment for themselves, and that this is a place they could get nourished. And part of the course is about them really experiencing, all of us experiencing, how much more loved we are than we could ever imagine. And so this is what I want your listeners to be focused on, is really that knowing of that they are adored and cherished in ways they can't even imagine.
Beautiful. What a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much for that resource. We will make sure we link that and a couple of the other things you mentioned. I want to link that codependency book, so I'll try to find it, or
I can give that. I will definitely give that to you. And I have a website also, www.sousanabadian.com, SOUSANABADIAN.com. So I have a website as well, if anyone wants to join the community that I have as well.
I would love that. All right. I will add that into the show notes. And yes, please, anytime you want to come back, if it's to launch something and you want to share that with our listeners, or, you know, if it's when your book comes out, or just any other time you want to return and talk about something related to wellness, we're happy to have you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure, man. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you. All right. For everybody else that's listening, thank you so much for tuning in. As we said before, please, hit the little notification icon so that you're notified when the latest episodes are out. Next week, you guys know how much we love TikTok, and we're bringing another TikTok creator on next week. This is Dr. Caitlin. She is going to be talking about self-love and body positivity. So very much looking forward to that episode. And as always, have a great week, and we will see you next time. Bye.